What happens when society decides you're beyond saving? When whispers follow you down every street, when even your own reflection becomes an enemy? When the pieces of your life have been scattered so far that you can't imagine anyone would ever want to pick them up? In the unforgiving frontier town of Mesquite Springs, New Mexico Territory, 1883, a woman had given up on love, on hope, on herself. The whole town knew her story. The whole town had decided her fate. But sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person who sees your worth is the one everyone else overlooks. And sometimes one question can change everything. This isn't just a love story. This is a story about what happens when someone refuses to let you disappear. When dignity meets desperation. When a man who knows what it's like to be judged sees past what everyone else calls broken. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about second chances, about worth, and about the power of one person who refuses to walk away. Because by the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the most shattered endings, and why one simple question can rebuild a life that everyone else had written off. Stay with me until the very end, because the question he asked her, it's going to change how you see everything. If you're new to this channel, I'm here to share the untold stories of courage, love, and redemption from America's frontier. These are the stories that history tried to forget, but they deserve to be told. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell, because every week I bring you powerful tales that will restore your faith in humanity. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that everyone deserves a second chance. Welcome to the Black Rancher, where every story reminds us that the heart sees what the eyes cannot. New Mexico Territory, October 1883. Saturday morning market day in Mesquite Springs was when the whole territory seemed to converge on the dusty main street. Vendors hawked their wares, children ran between wagons, and the smell of fresh bread mixed with horse dust and leather. But if you knew where to look, or rather where not to look, you might notice the woman who moved like a ghost through the crowd. Rebecca Hayes kept her eyes down as she navigated between the market stalls, her worn brown dress deliberately loose and shapeless, her auburn hair pinned severely back under a faded bonnet. At 28, she had perfected the art of becoming invisible. 3 pounds of flour, she whispered to Tom Morrison's eldest boy, who was manning the grain stall. Yes, ma'am, the boy replied, barely looking up as he measured the flour into her worn canvas bag. Rebecca reached into her small purse, careful not to let the coins jingle too loudly, careful not to draw attention. But as she paid, her fingers trembled slightly, and one of the coins slipped from her grasp, rolling across the wooden planks of the stall platform. She bent quickly to retrieve it, but as she straightened, she found herself face to face with Mrs. Catherine Whitmore, the mayor's wife and undisputed queen of Mesquite Springs society. Well, well, Mrs. Whitmore's voice carried that particular tone that could slice through steel. Rebecca Hayes, still shopping alone, I see. Rebecca's cheeks flushed crimson. Yes, ma'am. Such a shame, Mrs. Whitmore continued, loud enough for half the market to hear. She adjusted her pristine blue dress and perfect blonde curls with deliberate emphasis. A woman your age, still unmarried. Though I suppose after what happened with poor James Patterson, Rebecca's hands clenched around her flour bag. James Patterson. Even now, 3 years later, the name still felt like a physical blow. Catherine, that's enough. The voice belonged to Dr. Samuel Morrison, Tom's father, who had approached the stall to check on his son. But Mrs. Whitmore wasn't finished. I'm simply saying, Doctor, that some people need to accept their circumstances. Rebecca, dear, you're not getting any younger. And after the way James left you at the altar, she shook her head with mock sympathy. Well, perhaps it's time to consider other options. I hear the widow Johnson needs help with her laundry. The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. The altar. The dress that had hung in her closet for months after, still wrapped in tissue paper. The humiliation of standing there in front of the entire congregation while James Patterson rode out of town with Sarah Connolly, the banker's 17-year-old daughter. Everyone makes mistakes, Catherine, Dr. Morrison said firmly, and everyone deserves... Dr. Morrison is right. The voice that cut through the market chatter was deep, calm, and carried the unmistakable authority of a man who was used to being listened to. Every head turned toward the source. The man who stepped down from the magnificent black stallion was tall and broad-shouldered, with skin the color of rich coffee and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a well-tailored brown coat over dark trousers, and his black hat was tilted at just the right angle. Everything about him spoke of prosperity and quiet confidence. This was Nathaniel Cross, owner of the Broken Arrow Ranch, one of the largest and most successful cattle operations in the territory. A freedman who had built his empire through intelligence, determination, and an almost supernatural ability to read both land and livestock. But what made the entire market hold its breath wasn't his success or his obvious wealth. It was the way he was looking directly at Rebecca Hayes. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, tipping his hat politely but without warmth. "Dr. Morrison." He nodded to each in turn, then his gaze settled on Rebecca. "Miss Hayes," he said, and there was something in his voice and a gentleness that made Rebecca's chest tighten. "I was hoping I might have a word with you." Rebecca stared at him, clutching her flower bag like a shield. Nathaniel Cross wanted to speak with her. The man who could have any woman in 3 territories. The man who owned more land than some small countries. I don't," she stammered. Mrs. Whitmore let out a sharp laugh. "Mr. Cross, surely you don't mean to—" "Ma'am," Nathaniel's voice cut across hers with quiet steel, "I'm not in the habit of saying things I don't mean." He stepped closer to Rebecca, and she caught the scent of leather and sage and something warm that was uniquely him. When he spoke again, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "Miss Hayes, would you do me the honor of taking a walk with me? There's something I'd like to ask you." Rebecca's world tilted. In front of half the territory, the most respected and successful black rancher in New Mexico was asking her, broken, discarded, invisible Rebecca Hayes, to walk with him. What question could Nathaniel Cross possibly want to ask her? And why, after 3 years of hiding from the world, did she suddenly feel like maybe, just maybe, she was about to stop being invisible? Rebecca walked beside Nathaniel Cross in stunned silence, acutely aware that every eye in Mesquite Springs was following their progress down Main Street. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Miss Hayes," Nathaniel said as they reached the end of the business district where the desert began to reclaim the land, "may I ask you something?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He stopped walking and turned to face her completely. When she finally lifted her eyes to meet his, she was surprised by what she saw there. Not pity, not charity. Something else entirely. "Why do you make yourself so small?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Rebecca's mouth opened, then closed. Of all the things she had expected him to ask, about her family, about James, about why he was talking to her at all, this was not it. What do you mean?" she whispered. Nathaniel studied her face with those dark, penetrating eyes. "You walk like you're apologizing for taking up space. You speak like you're asking permission to exist. You dress like you're trying to disappear." He paused. "Why?" Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever asked her this before, not directly. Not with such gentle honesty. "Because," she said, her voice barely audible, "that's what broken things do. They try not to get in the way." "And what made you think you were broken?" The question was asked so quietly, so without judgment, that Rebecca found herself answering before she could stop herself. "James Patterson asked me to marry him in front of the whole church, said I was the most beautiful woman in the territory, said he couldn't live without me." Her voice grew stronger, fueled by old pain. "The banns were read, the dress was bought, the whole town was invited. And then Sarah Connolly came back from finishing school in Santa Fe, 17 years old, tiny as a bird, with golden hair and a laugh like music." Rebecca's hands clenched. "James took one look at her and decided I was insufficient. He left you at the altar, 3 hours before the ceremony. Sent his best man to tell me he'd changed his mind." Said he was sorry, but Sarah was more suited to his vision of a wife. Rebecca laughed bitterly. Do you know what it's like to stand in your wedding dress while someone explains that you're not good enough? Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he understood pain in his own way. James Patterson is a fool. Rebecca looked up at him in surprise. You don't even know me. I know enough. Nathaniel turned slightly, gesturing toward the vast expanse of his ranch visible in the distance. Miss Hayes, do you see that land out there? She followed his gaze. The Broken Arrow Ranch stretched as far as the eye could see, rolling hills dotted with cattle, strong fences, and buildings that spoke of prosperity and careful management. When I first came to this territory 15 years ago, I was nobody, a freedman with $40 and a stubborn streak. Every bank refused me loans. Every land office told me to try somewhere else. Every rancher said I'd never make it. Do you know what I did? Rebecca shook her head. I bought the most worthless piece of land I could find, rock and scrub and rattlesnakes, land nobody else wanted, and I built something beautiful on it. He looked back at her, not because the land was perfect, but because I could see what it could become. Rebecca stared at him, beginning to understand where this was leading, but not quite daring to believe it. Miss Hayes, James Patterson looked at you and saw only what you weren't. I look at you and see everything you are. And what am I? The question came out as barely a whisper. Nathaniel stepped closer, and when he spoke, his voice was firm and sure. You're the woman who takes care of her invalid mother without complaint. You're the one who never missed a church service, even when the whispers got so loud they drowned out the hymns. You're the woman who still leaves fresh bread on Doc Morrison's porch every week, because you know he doesn't eat properly since his wife died. Rebecca stared at him in shock. How do you know about... I notice things, Miss Hayes. I notice that you have the kindest heart in this territory. I notice that you're intelligent enough to keep the church books when the pastor's arithmetic fails him. I notice that you're strong enough to hold yourself together when lesser people would have crumbled. Tears were flowing freely down Rebecca's cheeks now. But I'm not beautiful, I'm not small and delicate, and Rebecca, the use of her first name stopped her mid-sentence. May I tell you what I see when I look at you? She nodded, unable to speak. I see a woman with the most expressive brown eyes I've ever encountered. I see someone who moves with grace even when she's trying to hide. I see strength in the set of your shoulders and wisdom in the way you listen before you speak. I see a woman who would be a partner, not a decoration. And if James Patterson was too blind to see that, then his loss is some other man's extraordinary gain. Rebecca covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed by emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 3 years. Why are you telling me this? She asked through her tears. Nathaniel was quiet for so long that she finally looked up at him. When their eyes met, she saw something there that made her heart skip. Because I've been watching you for 2 years, Rebecca Hayes, and I've been trying to work up the courage to ask you the most important question of my life. What question? Nathaniel took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Rebecca Hayes, he said, his voice steady and sure, would you do me the honor of letting me court you properly? Would you give a freedman rancher who sees your worth a chance to prove that some men know the difference between a woman and a girl, between depth and decoration, between love and infatuation? The question hung in the desert air like a prayer, like a promise, like the first ray of sunlight after the longest night. Rebecca Hayes, the woman who had spent 3 years making herself invisible, stood face to face with a man who was asking her to let him see her completely. What would she say to the question that could change everything? Before we continue with Rebecca's answer, I need to tell you something important. This story you're hearing, it's based on real events that happened all across the American frontier. Love stories that crossed racial lines, couples who defied society's expectations, and the incredible strength it took to build something beautiful in the face of hatred and prejudice. These stories matter. They remind us that love has always found a way, even in the most unlikely circumstances. If this story is touching your heart, please hit the subscribe button and ring that notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that everyone deserves to be seen for who they really are. This is The Black Rancher, and we're just getting started. Rebecca's about to give Nathaniel an answer that will change both their lives forever. Don't go anywhere, because what happens next will restore your faith in second chances. Rebecca stared into Nathaniel's eyes, her heart racing so fast she felt dizzy. The question hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. "You want to court me?" she whispered, as if saying it louder might make it disappear. "I want to court you properly," Nathaniel confirmed, his voice steady and sure. "With respect for your reputation, with patience for your healing, and with every intention of proving that you deserve to be cherished." Rebecca looked down at her worn dress, her work-roughened hands, her scuffed boots. "Nathaniel, you could have any woman in 3 territories, younger, prettier, without," she gestured vaguely at herself, "without all this damage." "Rebecca," his voice was firm but gentle, "look at me." When she raised her eyes, she found him studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed and safe at the same time. "I don't want any other woman. I want the one standing right in front of me, the one who has survived heartbreak and came out stronger. The one who knows the value of loyalty because she's lived without it. The one who understands that true love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other anyway." Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks. "I don't know how to be courted anymore. I don't know how to trust that someone won't change their mind." "Then we'll learn together," Nathaniel said simply. "We'll go slowly. We'll build something real, something lasting. And if you need time to believe that I mean what I say, I'll give you all the time in the world." Rebecca was about to respond when the sound of hoofbeats made them both turn. 3 riders were approaching at speed, dust clouds marking their path across the desert. "Rebecca!" The voice belonged to her younger brother, Michael, who worked at the bank. His face was flushed with exertion and something that looked like panic. "Rebecca, thank God I found you." Michael dismounted quickly, followed by Doc Morrison, and to Rebecca's surprise, Sheriff Tom Bradley, one of the few law enforcement officers in the territory who was known for his fairness. "What's wrong?" Rebecca asked, alarm replacing the warmth she'd been feeling moments before. "It's Mother," Michael said, his voice tight with worry. "She took a bad turn this morning. Doc Morrison says—" He looked at the doctor helplessly. Doc Morrison stepped forward, his weathered face grave. "Rebecca, your mother's had what appears to be a stroke. She's alive, but she's asking for you. We need to get you home immediately." Rebecca's knees nearly buckled. Her mother had been declining for months, but she'd seemed stable just that morning when Rebecca left for the market. "I have to go," she said to Nathaniel, already turning toward Michael's horse. "I have to—" "Of course you do." Nathaniel was already moving toward his own stallion. "I'll ride with you." Sheriff Bradley held up a hand. "Mr. Cross, with respect, this is a family matter. Perhaps it's best if—" "Sheriff Bradley," Nathaniel's voice carried quiet authority, "Miss Hayes just received devastating news. She's in no condition to ride alone, and her brother can't support both her and lead his horse. Unless you're planning to escort her yourself." The sheriff looked between Nathaniel and Rebecca, clearly uncomfortable but unable to argue with the logic. "I'll be fine," Rebecca started to say, but Nathaniel was already beside her. "Rebecca, you're trembling. You're in shock. Let me help you." Without waiting for permission, Nathaniel lifted Rebecca onto his horse and swung up behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back and the strength of his arms around her waist should have been inappropriate, scandalous. Instead, it felt like the first safety she'd experienced in years. "Hold on," he murmured against her ear, and she felt his breath warm against her neck. The ride to the Hayes homestead took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Rebecca's mind raced between worry for her mother and acute awareness of Nathaniel's presence. Every time the horse stepped into a depression or jumped a small ravine, his arms tightened protectively around her. When they reached the small, weathered house where Rebecca had lived her entire life, she could see neighbors already gathering in the yard, the way people did when someone was dying. Nathaniel helped her down, his hands steady on her waist as her feet found the ground. "Go," he said softly. "I'll wait here." "You don't have to—" "Rebecca." His voice stopped her. I'm not going anywhere. She searched his face, looking for any sign that this was too much, too complicated, too soon. Instead, she saw only steady determination and something that might have been love. Inside the house, Rebecca found her mother propped up in bed, her face pale but her eyes alert. Eleanor Hayes had been a strong woman before illness weakened her body, and even now there was steel in her gaze. "Becky," she whispered, reaching out with a trembling hand. Rebecca took her mother's hand and knelt beside the bed. "I'm here, Mama, I'm right here." "I heard," Eleanor said, her voice barely audible, "about the rancher." Rebecca's cheeks flushed. "Mama, it's not—" "Child." Eleanor's grip tightened with surprising strength. "I've been waiting 3 years for you to stop punishing yourself for James Patterson's failure of character. If a good man wants to court my daughter, he has my blessing." "But what will people say? What if you spend the rest of your life wondering what if?" Eleanor's eyes were fierce despite her weakness. "Becky, love doesn't come along often, and when it does, it doesn't always look the way you expected. But you don't turn your back on it because other people can't understand." Eleanor's gaze moved to the window, where Nathaniel could be seen waiting patiently beside his horse, despite the curious and sometimes hostile stares of the neighbors. "That man rode with you when he could have stayed safely away. He's waiting when he could have left. That tells me everything I need to know about his character." "Mama." Rebecca Eleanor Hayes, her mother's voice gained strength. "You are not too broken to be loved. You are not too damaged to deserve happiness. And if you let fear cheat you out of a chance at real love, I will come back from the grave to haunt you myself." Despite everything, Rebecca smiled through her tears. Even dying, her mother was still the strongest woman she knew. "Now go talk to that man," Eleanor said, settling back against her pillows. "And don't you dare let him get away." Rebecca stepped back outside to find Nathaniel exactly where she'd left him, despite the fact that several neighbors were now openly staring and whispering among themselves. "How is she?" he asked immediately. "Weak, but coherent. The doctor thinks—" Rebecca's voice broke slightly. "He thinks it's a matter of days, maybe weeks." Nathaniel nodded gravely. "I'm sorry, what can I do to help?" Rebecca became aware of the watching eyes, the barely concealed hostility from some, the curiosity from others. Mrs. Whitmore had arrived and was speaking in urgent whispers to several other women. "Nathaniel," Rebecca said quietly, "maybe you should go. People are starting to—" "Rebecca." His voice was calm, but firm. "Earlier today, I asked if you would let me court you. You haven't given me an answer yet." She looked around at the gathered neighbors, at Mrs. Whitmore's disapproving scowl, at her brother Michael, who was watching with wide eyes. "If I say yes," she whispered, "everything changes. People will talk. There will be trouble. You could lose business, lose standing in the community. And if you say no," Rebecca met his eyes, "if I say no, I go back to being invisible. I go back to being safe." "Do you want to be safe, Rebecca? Or do you want to be alive?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, like a promise, like the edge of a cliff she could either step back from or leap across with faith. Rebecca looked at this man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself, who had stayed when he could have left, who was asking her to choose courage over fear, hope over safety. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and for the first time in 3 years stopped trying to make herself small. "Yes," she said, loud enough for every neighbor to hear. "Yes, Nathaniel Cross. I would be honored to let you court me." The words hit the gathered crowd like lightning. Mrs. Whitmore's mouth fell open. Several men stepped forward protectively, as if a line had been crossed. But Rebecca Hayes, broken, invisible, discarded Rebecca Hayes, had just announced to the entire territory that she was choosing to be seen. What she didn't know was that her answer was about to unleash forces that would test both her courage and Nathaniel's determination in ways neither of them could imagine. The news spread through Mesquite Springs like wildfire in dry grass. By evening, it seemed every person within 50 miles knew that Rebecca Hayes, the woman who'd been jilted at the altar, had agreed to be courted by Nathaniel Cross, the territory's most successful black rancher. The reactions were as varied as they were intense. In the saloon, voices rose above the usual evening noise. "It ain't natural," growled Pete Hutchinson, a failed farmer who'd lost his land to poor decisions and worse luck. "A white woman with one of them." "Cross is richer than all of us combined," pointed out Jerry Walsh, the blacksmith, "and he's never caused trouble for anyone." "Money don't change what he is," Pete shot back, "and that Hayes woman ought to know better." Meanwhile, in the church rectory, Pastor William sat across from his wife, Martha, both of them struggling with the moral implications. "She's a member of our congregation, Harold," Martha said softly, "and she's been faithful even when the gossip was cruelest." Pastor Williams rubbed his forehead. "I know, dear. And Nathaniel Cross has donated more to our church than any other member. But the law says nothing about courting," Martha interrupted gently. "Only about marriage. And even then we'd be the ones performing the ceremony," Harold finished grimly. But it was at the Whitmore mansion where the real opposition was forming. Mayor Robert Whitmore sat in his study with 3 other men: banker George Connolly, Sarah's father, Sheriff Tom Bradley, and cattle baron William Morrison, no relation to Doc Morrison. "This cannot stand," Mrs. Catherine Whitmore declared from her position by the fireplace. "It's an affront to every decent family in this territory." "Now, Catherine," her husband said carefully, "Cross hasn't actually broken any laws." "Yet," interrupted Connolly, his face red with anger. "But what happens when this association goes further? What happens to property values? What happens to our daughters' reputations when they have to live in a territory where this kind of thing is tolerated?" William Morrison leaned forward. "I'll be honest, gentlemen. I don't give a damn who Cross courts as long as he keeps his cattle off my land. But I do care about stability. This kind of controversy draws attention from the territorial government. That's bad for all our business interests." Sheriff Bradley had been quiet, but now he spoke up. "I've known Tom Morrison, Doc Morrison, for 20 years. He's as fair a man as I've ever met, and he thinks highly of both Rebecca Hayes and Nathaniel Cross." "Doc Morrison is getting old," Mrs. Whitmore sniffed. "His judgment may be compromised." "What exactly are you suggesting we do?" the mayor asked his wife. Mrs. Whitmore's smile was cold. "Nothing illegal, of course. But society has ways of making its disapproval known. And if Mr. Cross finds his business relationships strained, perhaps he'll reconsider his choice of companionship." 20 miles away, at the Broken Arrow Ranch, Nathaniel sat on his porch with his foreman and oldest friend, Jacob Washington. No relation, but they'd chosen to share the name of the first president as freedmen. "You sure about this, Nate?" Jacob asked, whittling a piece of wood with steady strokes. "That woman's been through hell. You add the pressure of being with you and what, Jake?" Nathaniel's voice was quiet but firm. "I should let fear make my decisions. Let other people's prejudice dictate my life." "I'm thinking about her as much as you," Jacob said. "She's fragile right now. What happens when the real pressure starts?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, remembering the way Rebecca had felt in his arms during the ride to her mother's house. The trust she'd shown, the courage it had taken to say yes in front of all those people. "She's stronger than anyone gives her credit for," he said finally, "including herself." Both men stood as a rider approached the ranch house. It was Miguel Santos, a Mexican vaquero who worked for Nathaniel and served as an informal messenger between the outlying ranches. "Señor Cross," Miguel called as he dismounted, "I bring word from town." "What kind of word?" Miguel glanced at Jacob, then back to Nathaniel. "Some of the merchants, they are concerned about your business relationship with Miss Hayes." "What exactly does that mean?" "Peterson's grain store. He will no longer sell to you directly. Says you must send your men, not come yourself. And the bank—" Miguel hesitated. "What about the bank?" "Young Michael Hayes. He was let go today. The manager said they were restructuring." Nathaniel's hands clenched into fists. Rebecca's brother had been fired because of his courtship. The retaliation was beginning already, and it was targeting the people he cared about. "There's more," Miguel continued reluctantly. "Some of the other ranchers, they are talking about the cattle buyers from Denver, saying maybe they don't want to deal with uncertain Suppliers. Jacob stood up abruptly. They're threatening your contracts. Nate, if you lose the Denver buyers, I know what it means, Nathaniel said quietly. Nathaniel understood the implications perfectly. The Denver cattle buyers were his primary source of income. Without them, the Broken Arrow Ranch would struggle. His 40 employees would lose their jobs. Everything he'd built over 15 years could crumble, all because he'd asked to court a woman. Senor, Miguel said softly, perhaps if you were to reconsider... No. Nathaniel's voice was steel. I will not let fear or prejudice dictate my life, not anymore. Jacob studied his friend's face. Even if it costs you everything. Nathaniel looked out over the land he'd transformed from worthless rock and scrub into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. Then he thought about Rebecca's face when he'd asked why she made herself so small, the tears when he'd told her what he saw when he looked at her. Jake, 15 years ago, I could have played it safe. I could have taken a job working for someone else, kept my head down, avoided making waves. Instead, I bought land nobody wanted and built something beautiful. This is the same choice. I can play it safe, court some safe woman who won't cause controversy, and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Or I can fight for something real, something worth having, even if it costs me everything. And if Rebecca can't handle the pressure, if she breaks under it... Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Then I'll be there to help her put the pieces back together, just like she's helping me remember what it means to hope for something beyond business success. Unknown to Nathaniel at that very moment, Rebecca was sitting by her mother's bedside, holding Eleanor's increasingly cold hand and facing the same choice from a different angle. Her brother Michael had come home in tears, carrying a letter of dismissal from the bank. The church ladies had already started crossing the street when they saw her coming. Even the postmaster had been coldly polite when she'd tried to collect the mail. "Mama," she whispered to the sleeping woman, "what if I'm not strong enough? What if I'm bringing trouble to everyone I care about?" Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her daughter with effort. "Becky," she whispered, "are you thinking of running again?" "I'm thinking of being practical. If I end this now, if you end this now," Eleanor's voice gained unexpected strength, "you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you gave up the love of a lifetime because you were scared. But Michael lost his job. People are treating us like what? Like people who dared to choose love over conformity?" Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand. "Honey, do you think your father and I didn't face opposition? An Irish Catholic girl marrying an English Protestant boy? We nearly caused a riot at our own wedding." Rebecca stared at her mother. "You never told me that. Because by the time you were old enough to understand, it didn't matter anymore. Love that's real, love that's worth having, it survives the storms. It gets stronger because of them." Eleanor's breathing grew labored, but her eyes remained fierce. "Rebecca, promise me something. Anything, Mama. Promise me you won't let fear make you small again. Promise me you'll fight for what you want, even if it scares you. Especially if it scares you." Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest. A straightening of her spine, a lifting of her chin. Her mother was right. She'd spent 3 years being safe, being invisible, being small. Maybe it was time to be brave. Michael appeared in the doorway, his face streaked with tears and anger. "Becky, I heard what happened to me at the bank. If ending things with Mr. Cross would help." Rebecca looked at her baby brother, barely 19, and trying to be the man of the house. Then she looked at her mother, whose eyes held decades of hard-won wisdom. "Michael," she said, her voice steady and sure for the first time in years, "Mr. Cross asked me a question today. He asked why I make myself so small. What did you tell him?" Rebecca stood up, feeling strength flow into her spine like steel. "I told him it's what broken things do, but I think I was wrong. I think making yourself small is what scared things do, and I'm done being scared." As the first drops of rain hit the windows, Rebecca Hayes made a decision that would change not just her life, but the entire future of Mesquite Springs. She was going to fight for her happiness, even if it meant war. The storm that had been building all day finally broke over Mesquite Springs, with the fury of nature unleashed. Lightning illuminated the small Hayes homestead as Rebecca sat vigil beside her mother's bed, but the real storm was brewing in her heart. Eleanor Hayes drew her last breath just as the thunder reached its crescendo, passing peacefully with her daughter's hand in hers and a smile on her face. 3 days later, the entire territory seemed to converge on the small cemetery outside Mesquite Springs for Eleanor's funeral. She had been a beloved figure, a woman who had nursed the sick, fed the hungry, and never turned away anyone in need, regardless of their circumstances or color. Pastor Williams delivered a beautiful eulogy about a woman who had lived her faith through action, and as the mourners gathered around the graveside, the social divisions that had seemed so important days before felt suddenly petty in the face of genuine loss. Nathaniel stood at the back of the crowd, having debated whether his presence would cause more harm than comfort. But when Rebecca looked up and their eyes met across the sea of black-clad mourners, the gratitude in her gaze told him he'd made the right choice. After the service, as people began to drift away, Nathaniel approached Rebecca where she stood beside the fresh grave. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said simply. "Your mother was a remarkable woman." "She was," Rebecca agreed, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "She told me something before she died, about choosing courage over fear." Before Nathaniel could respond, Mayor Whitmore approached with several other prominent townspeople, including banker Connolly and cattle baron Morrison. "Miss Hayes," the mayor said, his tone carefully formal, "please accept our condolences. Your mother was a pillar of this community." "Thank you," Rebecca replied. "Now," Whitmore continued, "in light of recent events, some of us have been discussing your situation. Perhaps this period of mourning would be an appropriate time to reconsider certain associations, for the good of the community, you understand." The implicit threat hung in the air like smoke. End the relationship with Nathaniel, or face continued social and economic pressure. Rebecca looked around the circle of faces, some sympathetic, some hostile, all watching to see what the broken woman would do when pressed. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying a new quality that made several of them step back involuntarily, "my mother taught me many things. She taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear." She moved to stand beside Nathaniel, close enough that there could be no doubt about where her loyalties lay. "She also taught me that love, real love, is worth fighting for, even when that fight is difficult, even when people don't understand. Even when it costs you everything." Banker Connolly's face reddened. "Miss Hayes, you need to consider the practical implications. Your brother needs work. You'll need support during this difficult time. Perhaps if you were to see reason—" "Mr. Connolly," Nathaniel's voice was calm but carried an edge of steel, "are you threatening Miss Hayes at her mother's funeral?" "I'm offering practical advice to a woman who may not be thinking clearly due to grief," Connolly shot back. "Then let me offer some practical advice in return," Nathaniel said, stepping forward. "I employ over 40 people on my ranch. I purchase thousands of dollars worth of supplies annually from local merchants. I pay more in territorial taxes than most of you combined. If this community chooses to make my personal life a matter of public concern, I'll be happy to conduct my business elsewhere. Denver is always eager for reliable cattle suppliers and good ranch hands. I'm sure my employees would be welcome there." The implications hit the assembled men like physical blows. Losing Nathaniel's business would devastate several local merchants. Losing 40 families would cripple the local economy. "Now see here," Morrison blustered. "You can't threaten—" "I'm not threatening anyone," Nathaniel said calmly. "I'm simply stating facts. Miss Hayes and I intend to continue our courtship. If that causes problems for narrow-minded individuals, those individuals are welcome to take their concerns elsewhere." Rebecca felt a surge of pride and love so strong it nearly took her breath away. Here was a man willing to risk everything he'd built to defend her honor. A man who saw her worth and was willing to fight the entire territory to prove it. "Furthermore," Nathaniel continued, "I've decided to establish the Eleanor Hayes Memorial Fund to help widows and families in need throughout the territory. The initial donation will be $5,000. $5,000 was more money than most of the assembled men would see in 5 years. The gesture effectively made Nathaniel untouchable from a social standpoint. No one could openly oppose a man who had just made such a generous charitable donation in honor of a beloved community member. Pastor Williams stepped forward, his face showing both relief and admiration. "Mr. Cross, that's an incredibly generous gesture. I'm sure Eleanor would be honored." "She was a woman who believed in second chances," Nathaniel said, his gaze moving to Rebecca. "She taught her daughter that love isn't about perfection, it's about choosing each other anyway. I intend to honor that wisdom." The crowd began to disperse, the immediate confrontation diffused by Nathaniel's masterful handling of the situation. But as the groups walked away, Rebecca realized that while they'd won this battle, the war was far from over. "That was brilliantly done," she said to Nathaniel as they walked toward his horse. "Your mother's death gave me clarity," he replied. "Life is too short, and love is too precious to let other people's fear dictate our choices." They stopped beside his stallion, and Nathaniel turned to face her fully. "Rebecca, these past few days have shown me something important. Courting you isn't going to be easy. There will be more opposition, more pressure, more attempts to drive us apart." Rebecca's heart clenched. "Are you saying you want to end—" "No." His voice was firm and sure. "I'm saying I don't want to court you anymore." The words hit her like a physical blow. After everything, after his beautiful words and grand gestures, he was ending it after all. "I understand," she whispered, tears starting to flow. "The pressure, the threats to your business, it's too much. I should have known—" "Rebecca." Nathaniel's hands cupped her face gently, stopping her words. "I don't want to court you because I want to marry you." The world tilted. Rebecca stared into his eyes, certain she had misheard. "What? These past few days have taught me that life can change in an instant. Your mother's death, the threats from the town council, the realization that we could lose everything. It's made me understand that I don't want to waste time with lengthy courtships and social conventions." Nathaniel dropped to one knee right there beside the cemetery fence, pulling out a simple but beautiful gold ring. "Rebecca Eleanor Hayes, you are the strongest, kindest, most courageous woman I have ever known. You've survived heartbreak and loss and rejection, and instead of becoming bitter, you've become compassionate. Instead of becoming hard, you've remained soft enough to love again." Tears streamed down Rebecca's face as she stared down at this incredible man kneeling in the dust, offering her everything. "I want to build a life with you. I want to face whatever storms come together. I want to prove to you every day for the rest of our lives that you are not too broken to be loved. You are exactly perfect enough to be cherished. Rebecca Hayes, will you marry me?" The question hung in the air like a prayer, like a promise, like the answer to every broken dream she'd ever had. Rebecca looked down at Nathaniel Cross, successful rancher, pillar of the community, the man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. The man who was willing to risk everything to make her his wife. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Nathaniel Cross. Yes, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her for the first time, Rebecca realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with someone asking exactly the right question at exactly the right moment. She had spent 3 years believing she was too broken to be loved. But Nathaniel had asked her why she made herself so small, and in answering him, she had discovered something profound. She wasn't broken at all. She was simply a woman who had been waiting for the right man to see her worth. The wedding of Rebecca Hayes and Nathaniel Cross took place on a beautiful spring morning in 1884, not in the church as tradition might have dictated, but in the meadow behind the Broken Arrow Ranch House, surrounded by wildflowers and the vast New Mexico sky. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. And what a crowd it was! Ranch hands and merchants, territorial officials and neighboring ranchers, people of every color and background come to witness something remarkable. Rebecca wore a dress of ivory silk that Nathaniel had ordered from Santa Fe, not the elaborate gown she'd planned to wear 3 years before, but something simple and elegant that suited the woman she had become. Her hair was adorned with wildflowers, and her face glowed with a happiness that seemed to light her from within. Nathaniel stood beside her in a black suit that emphasized his commanding presence, but his eyes were soft with love as he looked at his bride. "Do you, Rebecca Eleanor Hayes, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Rebecca said, her voice clear and strong. "Do you, Nathaniel Cross, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Nathaniel replied, his voice filled with quiet conviction. As they kissed to seal their union, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Even some of those who had opposed the match initially had to admit that the love between them was undeniable. During the reception that followed, as Rebecca and Nathaniel moved among their guests, several people approached them with words of wisdom and support. Doc Morrison, now approaching 70 but still sharp, clasped Nathaniel's hand warmly. "Son, you've got yourself a treasure. Rebecca's been like a daughter to me since her parents passed. You treat her right." "Every day for the rest of my life," Nathaniel promised. Even Sheriff Bradley, who had been skeptical of the relationship initially, offered his congratulations. "Mr. Cross, Mrs. Cross," he said with a respectful nod, "I wish you both every happiness. This territory needs more examples of people choosing love over fear." But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when young Michael Hayes, now working as Nathaniel's assistant ranch manager, stood to offer a toast. "6 months ago," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "my sister believed she was too broken to deserve love. Today, she's married to a man who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself. They taught our whole community something important, that love doesn't see color or class or past mistakes. Love sees the heart. And when two people choose each other despite what the world says, despite what's easy, despite what's safe, that's when you know it's real." As the celebration continued into the evening, Rebecca and Nathaniel found themselves standing together on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the New Mexico sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Do you ever think about James Patterson?" Nathaniel asked quietly. Rebecca considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but not with sadness anymore. I think about him with gratitude." "Gratitude? If he hadn't broken my heart, I might never have learned what it meant to heal. If he hadn't made me feel broken, you might never have taught me that I was whole all along." Nathaniel pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his side. "And if the town council hadn't opposed our relationship," he said, "we might have taken years to realize how much we meant to each other. Sometimes the obstacles are what show us how much something is worth fighting for." Rebecca looked out over the land that was now her home. The rolling hills dotted with cattle, the strong fences, the buildings that spoke of prosperity, built through honest work and determination. "Nathaniel," she said softly, "that first day, you asked me why I made myself so small. I remember. I have a question for you now." He turned to look at her, curious. "How did you know? How did you see worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "I suppose," he said finally, "it's because I knew what it felt like to be judged by what I wasn't instead of what I was. When I looked at you, I didn't see a woman who had been rejected. I saw a woman who had survived rejection and remained kind anyway. And that was enough. Rebecca, that was everything. Anyone can be kind when life treats them well. It takes someone extraordinary to be kind when life has been cruel. It takes someone extraordinary to still believe in love after love has disappointed them." Rebecca leaned into her husband's warmth, feeling a peace she had never imagined possible. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we build something beautiful together. We prove that love really can conquer fear. We show this territory that some bonds are stronger than prejudice." "And when people ask us how we made it work?" Nathaniel smiled, remembering the question that had started it all. "We tell them it began with the right question at the right time. We tell them that sometimes the most important thing you can ask someone is not who they used to be, but who they choose to become." As the stars appeared in the vast New Mexico sky, Rebecca and Nathaniel Cross stood together on the threshold of their new life, proof that love really could triumph over fear, that broken hearts could heal stronger than before, and that sometimes the best love stories begin with someone asking exactly the right question: why do you make yourself so small? Because when you stop making yourself small, you discover you were never broken at all. You were just waiting for the right person to help you remember how magnificent you really are. This story is based on the real experiences of countless couples who defied society's expectations to build lives together on the American frontier. Love stories that crossed racial lines, couples who chose each other over comfort, and the incredible courage it took to stand up for what was right. These aren't just entertaining tales from the past. They're reminders that love has always found a way, even in the most challenging circumstances. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to The Black Rancher and hit that notification bell. Every week I share powerful stories of courage, love, and determination from America's frontier, stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the power of choosing love over fear. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not too broken to be loved, not too damaged to deserve happiness, not too lost to find their way home. These forgotten histories matter. They show us that courage and dignity have always existed, even when the history books tried to erase them. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for caring about stories that matter. Thank you for believing that everyone deserves to be seen for who they really are. Until next time, remember, when someone asks you why you make yourself small, maybe it's time to stand up and show the world how magnificent you really are. This is The Black Rancher, reminding you that the most important question isn't whether you've been broken, it's whether you're brave enough to heal.